Thank you very much, and good morning. I'm Tom Ivester, an alcoholic, and it's good to see you again. Glad everybody survived and didn't get blown away, and it's nice to be up and at it. I got to do something with the book here. Keep trying to read it or fumble with it or something. Little change in schedule. I have to follow Bruce's great lead. I want to adjust something just a little bit. It won't change the times of anything, and you're already in place, so it won't affect that whatsoever. But I just got thinking that I want to spend a little bit of time on something before I launch right into to step. It's kind of sort of a bridge into it. When I was looking at the information coming down here, they put in a history period. And then when I got here, so I didn't have that. And I'd already prepared one. It's frustrating to have something prepared and not deliver. So, I'd hate like the devil to carry that back to North Carolina and say, now here's what I would have told them if they'd It warms up in a hurry.
Nice jacket.
Thank you very much. That's the other one. That's the very perceptive Joe Kirby noticed. He said folks thought I was going over to pray and meditate before the deal. He'd seen me spill coffee all over my shirt, so I had to go over and do my laundry. So part of what I'm doing right now is drying out from that thing. So, really know how to humble a guy here. What I thought about it's always kind of important to me to look at stuff in context. And I don't want to talk about history in terms of what happened when. Well, you probably gathered last night, I am not exactly the most reliable in the world in terms of specificity. I think we started in 1935, but I'm not sure. Somewhere around thereabouts. Bill started for that. So anyway, that's about how erudite I am about history. So I won't be talking about times and place. Instead, I got to thinking about, a while back I got thinking about, how our fellowship has developed over the years. And I've been blessed to see a fair amount of it. And he was 22 years old when I got here. And we were a fairly small, intimate group of people. 125,000 was a big bunch of folk. But we didn't tend to be bunched up too much. There were a few areas where there were a gaggle of folk, but most of the country was typified by places where if there was a group at all, it was the only one in town. And if you wanted to make 90 meetings in 90 days, you better have a Lear jet, because you ain't going to do it. Any place I ever lived in the city of Charlotte, our largest city, when I first came there in '60, we had 12 groups in the town. And now there must be 300 or 400, I imagine, at a minimum. And so we were a markedly different kind of a fellowship. The height of organization. I was thinking when it was amazing how you see things that sort of spell out stuff for you. I was thinking about the first international convention that I went to. It was in Toronto in '65, and I don't know how many folk we had there. Probably around 15,000 or something. Great. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Probably around 15,000 or so, but it was a relatively small bunch compared to who we are now. And I remember going in there and how overwhelmed I was with that thing. And in the entire week, I might have seen 8 or 10 people that I knew. Most of them went with me, but it was a pretty small little gathering, and my circle of friends in Alcoholics Anonymous was extremely limited. I was just absolutely amazed at being there. I had a chance to meet Bill Wilson, and we weren't fishing buddies. I didn't hang out with him or go shoot pool, but we did just chat a minute. And I heard him talk several times. In fact, I heard him talk incessantly. He just like to never quit. And it was a great experience. I heard him make a statement in '65. I've read it since, but I heard him make a statement in a little small meeting. We were smaller than this that we were in. He said something that's had implications for me ever since. When he was talking about our fellowship and he was talking about traditions, he said the function of Alcoholics Anonymous is not to provide some subterranean hiding place for alcoholics to hover in fear. It's not a place to hide out, not a subterranean society. The function of Alcoholics Anonymous is to restore me to my rightful place in the world so that I can take my place there. Now, I didn't know what he was talking about too much at the time. I knew it sounded better than being a mole, so I listened, and I never forgot that this is not some place where the job's done if I just come in here and get what I need and then get on with the business of living, that there's a lot more to it than that. So a lot of things that are kind of impressive to me when I look back and think about and what I want to spend just a little bit of a time on is we talk about our stories and what we were like, what happened, what we're like now. I'd like to spend just a little bit of time on the fellowship. Some of what I've personally experienced, some of what I've come to believe about it, but some of the nature of the character of Alcoholics Anonymous is what we were like and what we sometimes call the good old days. What happened to bring about monumental change in Alcoholics Anonymous and what we're like now, just from one guy's perspective. And so let me share just a bit of that. We were a pretty small crowd. We were a sparse crowd. We were a folk who did an awful lot of traveling, visiting groups, helping to get groups started. The thing I think about is when I think about those early days, that the first 100 members are folks that I could readily identify with. They sound like me on a Saturday night. They just were wild, reckless, didn't have a clue where they were going. They were going there wide open, but didn't have a ghost of an idea. Nobody was in charge. Bill was, after a fact. No program, no steps, no headquarters, no leadership. We were, on a good day, 100 drunks. Best I could tell, there never was 100 at one time. There were intermittent members and folks on leave of absence. So even when we were only 100, we were hard to count. But I can identify with that bunch of just running around in circles and taking off and crashing beaches and stuff like that. That's my kind of deal. Sometimes I wish we were still that way. And they were marvelous people. I had the privilege of getting to know several of those folk, and they were really remarkable characters. But the people who astound me when I look at our history are not those. I can understand those. What astounds me are what I would call the sort of second level of members. The ones who came into the picture back when we first started to get real notoriety, where we started to get some real publicity. And I'm sure everybody here remembers the Jack Alexander article and the Fortune article and some things that hit the public and captured the public fancy. The book didn't do that. It went out and was a dull thud. There very, very little that came from the book directly. But when those articles hit the popular press, so you picture this, if you will. Here's 100 folk on a good day. And they're looking at launching a program worldwide. And they send out mailers, articles, all over the place. It says, if you want help, call. Now picture that. 8,000 people responded in a relatively short period of time. And the thing that overwhelms me are the people who planted the flags in the outposts. Somebody in Jekyll, Island, or Brunswick, Georgia, somebody got that word and took the stand and planted the flag and said, let it be here. And held the fort until some help came. The watchword was, if you've got it, go share it with people. Traveling people came around. I experienced the time when traveling folk came into our area and helped start groups, helped support people who were standing there holding the flag heroically. Always interesting to me that the first AA meeting ever held in my state was conducted by a little old Scottish fellow named Dave, short little guy. And he was a drummer. He went around selling stuff. And he got off the plane at the airport, and there was, back in the old separate but equal days, there was a prison, a long-term prison with a black population. And he got, when he came off the plane, said, I bet there's some alcoholics in there. I think I'll go see. So he went over and talked to the warden and said, you got drunks in here? The guy said, yeah, man, we got a house full of them. And he said, wonder if I could talk to any of them that want to talk. That was the first meeting of AA ever conducted in my state. Now, it didn't last. It was a one-time deal. But that's symbolic of how AA got started in places, with somebody who had it and went to try to share it with somebody else. I had the privilege, and it is a privilege. It's a kind of a mixed blessing, but I had the blessing of being one of the guys holding the flag in a fairly large city in my state, Gastonia, and had the experience. It's an uncanny feeling. Some of you may have had it, of being the only member in the group. Weird feeling when you go and you're the only guy there. Plenty of coffee to go around. Ain't no problem with that. Business meetings are a snap, man. But it's a lonely feeling. They say, Jesus, if I'd only drunk in town, I do better than that. And but it was characteristic, just kind of a. And those folk that held that place, we've got people around the world still doing that to this day. There are still places on this planet where there are isolated populations, and AA's but a dream. So that was sort of I thought a major phase of our development, of people who worked together intensely, who supported each other jealously, and it had a kind of bonding quality, because one of the principles I think that was strongest in that period was that we literally needed each other. We literally needed each other. And that wasn't just some euphemistic thing of saying it feels good to have support. I'm talking about lifeline. I'm talking about absolute dependence on other alcoholics. And so they were good days in a lot of ways. I remember the day some of us were talking about women. Felicia was talking about having heard Marty Mann. Marty was not the first woman in AA, but she's the first one to stay sober. And I knew her. She was a fine person. I also know how valuable a woman member is when you're the only cat in town. When we started to roll and started to get some action going and started to get a few people in the group, I was the only guy in the group single. And I was the only one, well, obviously I didn't have a wife to keep me from going. And I was the only one young and dumb enough to work with women. That's a special kind of an experience. It's an experience you ought to miss. There's nothing wrong with it, but there's something wrong for a young single guy doing it, I'll tell you that. I made one 12-step call. I made a blue million, it seems like. I made one by myself on a female. And from then on, I had a woman with me. Now, I guarantee you they were not members. I've taken my mother on 12-step calls, girlfriends, sister, hitchhikers, anybody. I have never gone alone another single time. But what I ran into, I mean, it wasn't that I was Don Juan, but so many females have had very, very disappointing relationships with folk. And it's very easy to confuse kindness for something else. And so I never experienced, whether it was a grandma or a teeny bopper who didn't go through a period of sort of puppy love feeling type stuff. And so it was just a bad deal. I'd tell you, the first woman came into town, I swear to God, I have never been more thankful. She was sober. And man, I was delighted to see her. I have a lot of fun with it, but I had one old gal. She was the same age as me as when she came in, 24. Bad drunk. Geez, she was a bad drunk. Sobered up at my house, and I was so proud of her. She'd been sober 5 or 6 weeks, and I was just absolutely would have given her the Congressional Medal of Honor. And I went by to pick her up one night, and there she sat in all her glory, drunker than a billy goat. I had another one with her, drunker than she was, that I didn't know. And I was chairing the meeting that night. I didn't have time for any Freudian counseling or anything. So I said, get in the car. And they said, what about the liquor? I said, bring it. I don't care. And so here I go with 2 drunk women. And they get in the meeting, open it up, and I made that fatal mistake. Any announcements? And the one I didn't know stuck her head up. I said, oh, God, what is it? She said, I'd like to announce it. I'd like to get the hell out of here. And did. So I mean, it was funny that night. I'll tell you, half the night spent chasing that gal up down the highway. But they were hairy times, you know. And by the way, that the other girl got sober and died sober some 20-some years later. Yeah, so excuse me. But those were kind of characteristics of that time. They were a time that were characterized by intensive personal work with each other. If like the kind of thing we're doing here was absolutely unheard of. I mean, no such thing as this or anything that even looked remotely like it existed. I never heard of a retreat to get deeper into recovery. I didn't hear them because it didn't exist. I never went to a big book meeting the first 15 or 20 years I was sober. Not because I didn't like them, they weren't any. So we were a group in those early years that was really a group of alcoholics in action. We were folk who spent a lot of time in meeting and in fellowship and in doing things together. But the bottom line of what we did was intensive work with other alcoholics. The thing of those, some people say they'd like to have those good old days back. You won't hear me saying that. Deliver me from those good old days. The 3 o'clock in the morning phone calls that you did answer back then were not my idea of a great way to go. And so I can't say that I enjoyed it. I can say that I grew from them. But I can't say that they were fun. I had the unfortunate experience back in those days of having an alcoholic die in my arms. No place to take him. So you won't hear me talking about the good old days. There were some good old times. But I'm one who deeply appreciates the progress that was made over the years where we saw a time when alcoholics could actually be given decent treatment in a dignified setting. It meant a lot to me. I never went through it, but I sincerely appreciated that because I know what the alternative is, and those notions about we wish those old days would come back, I think really bears a lot of examination of whether we really want to do that or not. I'll comment just a little bit more about that a little bit later. But they were I'll just give you a couple of examples. If you were not there, and odds are that you weren't. My impression is that somewhere around 80% of the folk in Alcoholics Anonymous today have never been involved in a 12-step call on either end, either giving or receiving. It's a whole experience loop that seems to be dominantly missing in the fellowship today. When we talk about the good old days and wishing they were back, I really wonder what we'll do with them if they come back. I wonder how we'll respond. What I've found, and you probably found the same thing, is that we tend to be intensely loyal to what worked for us. Intensely loyal, no matter what it is. Like I found mine in Jackson Prison in Jackson, Michigan. I think that's the finest place in the world to get sober. Finest place in the world to get a program of recovery. I've been telling people that for 45 years. I've never had a taker. And I would encourage them to, but I'll always have a loyalty. I go back up there every couple of years. Mainly to make sure I ain't there, and to try to say something to the guys who do, because I know what can happen to somebody there, and I have a loyalty to that, and you do too, to whatever it was. Most of us today didn't come from a 12-step call. Most of us today came through a treatment program, a professional referral, or whatever, employee assistance. There are just a ton of things, all of which I'm grateful for. But what happens is that in those old days, we were willing to do those unbelievable things of going to places that a sane person wouldn't go because somebody went for us. And there's an intense loyalty, a willingness to do that. When you say to somebody who hasn't had that experience, come go with me over to the nastiest part of town. We have a fellow there with an axe that we need to call on. Well, the average person is going to say, are you drinking or what? One night I was speaking at a meeting down in Dunn, North Carolina. And that just seemed like a good place for me to be speaking. Dunn. And right in the middle of the meeting, now I don't have a thing about women. I married one. Now I'm very, very fond of women. But it just so happened that a drunk woman walked in. Well, I thought it kind of added to the meeting. Now, it didn't bother me. She came in and she was sort of doing what she ought to do. She's sauntering around, high-handed folk. And then she went to the kitchen for some reason and started rattling pans. Now, her behavior was normal. That's normal. That's what a drunk... I don't know why you rattle pans, but what was really extraordinary to me, I'm standing there and I'm watching the group, watching the reaction. Now, what do you do when you got a drunk woman walking into a meeting? Well, if you were with that Dunn group, what you do is sit there and look stunned. And you look bewildered, and you look at the person next to you, and you can just hear the thoughts that are going. Somebody better call 911. Somebody call the police. Throw her out of here. Yeah. What do you do? And I was just watching that. And guess what happened? The oldest member in the group, a gal named Marguerite, stood up right slow, went back, put her arm around the old girl, took her back in the room, talked to her. Now, you don't do that as a reflex. You do that as a product of experience, of being able to move in and help, and instead of backing off and reacting and saying somebody ought to do something. And so that whole business of that as a way of life was an important part of the function in those early days. Maybe just two other stories. But it really was fun in hindsight. I had a call one night on a fairly prominent executive there in one of the industries in town. He called me. I saw pretty quick. that his primary motivation was to get away from his wife and go get a drink. She wouldn't let him have one. Now, I've always made it a rule. Back then, and I used to carry booze in my car. I guess it's not just because I encourage drinking, but it's a great way to sober up when you don't have detox. And so I always had booze. And I picked up this guy, and it's always been my rule that I will work with a drunk. I won't buy him a drink until I'm absolutely convinced that I can't help him. And then when I'm absolutely convinced that I can't help him, fine, have a drink. But that's sort of the way I go. So I messed with this guy till 4 o'clock in the morning, and finally I said, all right. I didn't have any booze that night. I said, where's your favorite bootlegger? So he told me. And it was one I'd never been to. I don't know how I missed that dude. But those things don't look too bad when you're drunk. But when you're sober, man, that looked like an opium den in Calcutta or something. That was a really, really grungy place. So I said, have at it. And he went over and got a little bottle of something. I mean, he'd never seen a tax seal. That stuff looked like fly spray or something. And so he's sucking on it, and of all the times, all at once, blue lights. Where's the blue light lady? The blue lights came on, and they raided the joint. 4 o'clock in the morning. And nothing in there but just drunks laying out all over the place. Here they come. And I was watching this. I'm standing there watching it. You know, I'm looking like a young Ivy League student or something. And this one cop kept looking at me. And finally, he couldn't stand it. Well, he came over and said, "Mister, what are you doing here?" And I said, "You wouldn't believe it." And he said, "Well, try me." And so I told him what I was doing, and he said, "Well, I'll be damned." And the amazing thing is, he gave me the drunk. He didn't take him to jail. Took everybody else to jail. Gave me that drunk. Gave me that grungy liquor to take for it. And from then on, gave me hell. I'm telling you, you talk about posting the bondsman's name on the jailhouse wall. Every time they had a nutty drunk up, I know who to call. Call this guy. So I guarantee you, those good old days. Deliver me. So it was a good time. It was an action time. It was not a high-tech time. It was hands-on. You know, and if you wanted to know how the program worked, get in the car and go get a drunk. You know, now I still get some 12-step calls, but not many. Once in a while, I probably get maybe 3 a year. I've had 3 in one day back in those old days. I've had somebody that hadn't had a drink for 30 minutes holding down one who just had. I mean, I'm talking about bedlam, and that sounds like a weird way to run a circus, and it is. The apes were in charge that day, I'll guarantee you. But I got through it and had a great time. Yeah. I'll just tell you one other, not a drunk story. This is a wild drunk sober story, and I was a kind of an exuberant young dude then. I'm an exuberant old dude now, but now I'm using the word "I" deliberately with this little story because that's the point, really. I was really trying to get that thing going. Now, and I didn't know what a public meeting was. And in fact, most of us don't know what it is. We don't do it much anymore. But I knew what it sounded like. It sounded like you get the public together and have at 'em. So I was sort of a grandiose thinker. And I borrowed the sanctuary of the biggest church in town. Sanctuary. I imported a speaker on credit. I didn't have any money to reimburse him. So I just said, "Come on in, we'll work it out." And contacted everybody. I mean, if there was anybody that even looked like a mover or a shaker or he was standing still, we brought him in. We had ministers, managers from industry, the mayor, the chief of police, the sheriff. We filled that sanctuary darn near up. We had something like 700 people. A public meeting in a town where AA didn't exist except for me and a couple of other dopes. And so we're going to do this public meeting, the idea being, obviously, that if you can get the word out, folks who interact with drunks can send them over, and maybe we can heal them. Well, I knew we had to do it with some class, even though we were broke. I'd just been out of jail a little while now. And I had it catered. Well, the rest of it, I couldn't even make a deposit. I'm broke. And so I had a nice dinner, really nice dinner. Now, I knew that rational human beings, I never had watched groups in action much when it came to money. I knew that anybody could look at that spread and calculate about how much it cost. And anybody could count the house and see what their pro rata share of that would be. You know that. Sent the buckets around, lots of buckets. Got $47. And I thought, my God, I'm going back to jail for trying to do God's work. And man, I was the loneliest guy on the planet. What do? Because I couldn't have paid that back in 5 years. I had a job making not much more than I made in prison. I was just barely. Well, word gets. It's amazing how we do. There are two things that bring us together. One is when we're celebrating something good. The other is when one of us is in trouble. Word got around in the region that old dummy has got himself into a little jackpot. And the folk in there, with no request from me, rounded up enough money to pay the whole deal off. I tell you what that taught me. I have never since done one single function that wasn't a we function. Unless it's something I'm individually sponsoring, and I've got no illusions about assuming other people into it. This is a we program. And man, that taught me a huge lesson. But those kinds of things were just, they were fun times in a lot of ways. The fellowship was intense, the feeling of belonging, the feeling of mission, that real first-person thing that being involved and actively working with drunks, that there's nothing that's more rewarding, more motivating today. There's not anything that's more motivating to us than that thing of really cutting through to somebody else. Today, I say to every new person that I welcome into AA, I always say this: I need you more than you need me. I always mean that. And I know they never believe it. They never. How could you believe that? My prayer is that I believe that. That I believe it. Because if I get to the point that I think I'm making some benevolent gesture and Mr. Nice Guy to the unwashed, I'm the one in trouble, not them. Very important for me to recognize my continuing need for other alcoholics. My continuing need to carry this message to somebody else. So I literally need them more than they need me. No wonder. You scared me, Joan. I thought you had a question. Doesn't pay to scratch your hair. What happened to sort of shift that around a little bit? And let me preface this. I think I hope I made the point in what I was saying, that I think there have been a lot of changes in Alcoholics Anonymous, and some that have been injurious in terms of their impact on the fellowship. Sometimes we want to cast blame elsewhere, and I'm not of that school. I believe that the overwhelming majority of problems that we have developed in Alcoholics Anonymous are from the inside, not the outside. And so the thing that stuff that kind of happened. well, right about the time I came in AA. AA was described as an illness by the American Medical Association. Sometimes it was declared, and there was declared, it was described as an illness along about that time. I don't think it had anything to do with me coming in, but it tied in. It was just about the same time. And slowly, that started to take hold. It's still not, I'm not sure that we aren't regressing a bit in that right now. But slowly we started to make the point that this was indeed an illness and not a moral deal. I was here in the throes of that sort of moral battle of whether this was just willful, wanton behavior or really was a disabling illness. And so that started, it was a slow thing. The battle for folks' minds is a major battle. And a lot of deep feelings about this kind of thing. Hospitals started to open up. And there had always been a few little specialized places like where Bill went. But for the average walking around drunk, there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. In the county I lived in, right when I was in the throes of all that stuff trying to get AA started, we had one person, one old doc, who would, quote, treat a drunk. Now, let me tell you what the treatment was. And this was it. This was the sum total of what was in that county. He practiced in his house. And you took the drunk around back to the kitchen door. That's a fact. And you went in the kitchen door just like a bootlegger, and he would pop him in the fanny with a shot and give you a prescription, and that was it. That was it. I was thankful for that. But that was a sum total. We started to get a few places that would crack the door. And we started to get folk into hospitals slowly under the diagnosis of alcoholism. But we had to do it on condition that we provided the keeper service. We had to provide a keeper for the drunk so that the nurses wouldn't have to mess with him. And we literally had to go in and stand shifts in some places. I've done it many times. To go in just like I'm going on guard duty or something. I'm going in I went one night, I went up to take my place, and I relieved a guy in the hall, and he said, he's doing pretty good. And so we visited a minute, and I walked in the room, no drunk. No drunk. I thought, where is that fool? We're on the 5th floor. And it had this little old narrow window. He couldn't jump. Where did that idiot go? And so I'm in there searching a room. It's not much bigger than the bathroom. I'm under the bed, looking in the bed. And I thought, Jesus, drunks will fool you. And then I heard a little clatter over in the wall locker. So I went over there and opened the wall locker. And he was only slightly confused. He thought he was standing at a urinal. And so I said, get out of there. He said, looked at me indignant. He said, I beg your pardon. I said, pardon my head. Get out. But those kinds of things don't endear you to caretaker staff, So I was amazed that we made as much progress as we did. There was a I'm sure not too interesting correlation between how those changes came and the emergence of accepting alcoholism as an illness and therefore reimbursable for treatment. And so what started to happen was we had some huge changes when a couple of things happened in the 80s. One, that in the 70s, 80s, that insurance thing started to pick up. Treatment started to just grow. I mean, all over the place. And the federal government got into it. I never thought I would live to see the day. But you and I saw a time when doing something with alcohol and drug problems was a part of a presidential platform. You couldn't even get it talked about at a service station when I came in here. And so there was a whole impetus changed about what we do with this thing. And so we had this huge proliferation of treatment facilities and programs all over the country. And some good stuff started to happen. But some interesting stuff started to happen with us. That zeal I was talking about of I need to go get this person because I need them no longer became necessary. It became no longer necessary. Didn't have to go get anybody. All at once, we've got folks delivered to our door. Smelling good, looking good. I've never had anybody from the treatment center throw up on me at a meeting. I don't think. Never have. I miss that in a way. Not enough to go get it, but but you see, it changed the character of the world. And we started seeing some interesting things happen. Now, some folks say that, Bill said it as a matter of fact, that if our program is ever destroyed, it won't be from the outside, it'll be from the inside. It'll be when we take on a sort of a hardened attitude, when we lose that recognition of how much we need each other, and when we start getting sort of isolated into ourselves. And what the thing I started to see happen was that we started to get overwhelmed with the influx of new people. We no longer needed them. We started finding it difficult to tolerate. I had a guy call me one time in my little old town. He and two or three more guys had started a group called the Newcomer Group. Well, that was a great idea. And they'd be about 4 or 5 strong every Wednesday night. And one Wednesday night, a bus pulled up, and 45 head of drunk fell out and started sucking up coffee. And, well, who's the welcoming committee? Who's the finance committee? This guy called me. He said, "My God, Tom, what do we do?" And I said, "Well, grow for one thing." And the thing that aggravated, a lot of times people in the treatment program will tell them that we consider AA meetings part of your deal, don't contribute. Well, that mismatch gets to be a little awkward, doesn't it? So what do you do? Other than get mad, back off, shut the door, hide, what do you do? Now, they rose to the occasion. The group still meets. But my God, it started to be that kind of thing. People started to get a kind of hardened attitude about this thing, to feel a little defensive about this avalanche of encroachment from facilities of people sending folk in. People started getting tagged into Alcoholics Anonymous from God knows how many sources. And the popular line is, and I think it's probably true, that back in the days I was talking about, there would be 10 old-timers for every newcomer. And then that at least reversed, where the newcomers overwhelmed the membership in most groups. And so it led to some interesting kinds of things. And we no longer needed to do 12-step work. That started to rapidly become a vanishing art. We started to let up mightily. I said it sort of slid by it, but it's a fact that a public meeting, I didn't know what it was, but I did one anyway. Public meetings used to be fairly common. I haven't heard of one anywhere for a long time. Actively developing relationships with good friends who can help influence alcoholics into this program, almost a relic of the past in much of our country. And so what happened was that we changed a lot. And we got people coming into AA who looked and felt good. Well, a lot of times you'd hear things like that, and you hear this in our ranks, that treatment centers say that these folks come in and have an equivalent of 1 year or 5 years. And some of our folks believe that. And rather than recognizing them as a newcomer, trying to learn their first day in recovery, It would tend to kind of ignore them or overrate them and not give that kind of head-on work that's so vital to finding a place here. Yeah, and to me, it seemed like our biggest deal was that when the character of our 12th step opportunity changed, we didn't change with it. We didn't adapt to a new reality. We didn't adapt well to recognizing people coming out of treatment as people in great need. We sort of backed off and looked at it as two different worlds. You'd hear mutterings like, they're doing our work. Our 12-step work's being done over there, and they're getting paid for it. You'd hear that sound of grousing in the ranks. Well, those were things that had some real kinds of impacts on our fellowship. It looks to me like, and in the way we do business, that our loyalties, that loyalty I was talking about, that fierce loyalty, it started to shift. And now, rather than that do or die for my sponsor, very often that's qualified with the relationship with a counselor or some outside advisor or whoever. I took on a guy to sponsor a while back. It was an interesting story, aside from the fact of the drama of it. The fellow asked me to sponsor him. I'd known him for a while, and he was one of those kind of fringe members. He was just sort of around the program and wasn't doing anything, just sort of a consumer. And he asked me about, we did a big book workshop, and he really got into that. He asked me about sponsoring him. And so we tentatively agreed. I said, tell me about your current relationship. So he told me that he had a sponsor, but things were not working well, and he wanted to make a change. And he said, do you want to know who my current sponsor is? And I said, well, not particularly. It's none of my business. And he said, well, I probably ought to tell you. I said, all right, go ahead. His counselor for 13 years was a non-alcoholic counselor at a treatment center. Now, what's wrong with that picture? Would it surprise you to know that at 13 years of recovery, this fellow had never had a home group? He had never sponsored a single person. He had never had any kind of a commitment to serve in any way. Never really been a functioning member of Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I didn't respond right off the bat. I just sort of settled down and I said, let me suggest one thing to you. You've never had a sponsor. What you had was the world's longest aftercare contract. What do you think about that? I mean, the umbilical was never cut. This guy just sort of stretched it out into the community. And then he snapped back in. Recovery, don't you leave, Jeff. Recovery would have been a euphemistic term for what he was doing. That literally is what it was, is the longest aftercare contract in the world. Right now, that fellow is the DCM in our district. There's no heroics on my part. It was just a matter of helping steer the guy in to become a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. He's a strong home group guy. He sponsors a drove of people right now. And he's had more fun. He's got married. He's quit trying to seduce folk that were wounded in meetings. He's married. And so you see what I'm talking about. Those kinds of things that just sort of generated. And what we see now in Alcoholics Anonymous, what we see now, we're a huge fellowship in a lot of ways. We're 2 million strong, the best we can tell, and we're all over the place almost. We still do have pockets of isolated populations. If you go to an international convention and you get the overwhelming sense of the magnitude of the program and the density of it, that I was not Minneapolis but San Diego. I was one day I was at one hotel and I was next door to the convention center, and all I was doing going from the hotel to the convention center, I'm standing on the sidewalk, nose to nose with a bunch of people. And we were at a dead stop. I mean, it looked like I-5 in L.A. trying on Friday afternoon. We were just gridlocked with people. And I thought, what are we doing? What are we doing here? And it just sort of reflects that we've gotten to be such a big thing that we can't find a place that logistically can handle the convention. And so it's just indicative that we are a big bunch. We've had a lot of changes in the thing. Specialty groups. We've spun off, and we got a group for about anything you can name now. They're all over the place. Some part of AA, some relatives of AA, but they're just all kinds of things that are there. Anonymous groups. I won't dwell on this too much, but there, as you gather, and you probably know, there are a lot of frustrations involved with some of those changes that occur in the fellowship, and they're bothersome to people. I was in a city out west a while back, and a young lady picked me up at the airport. A really nice person, a young school teacher, and just a bright-eyed gal, and so we were talking, and I said, "Tell me about your home group," and so she was telling me about it. Now I don't catch on real quick, but it became apparent to me after a while that when she said home group, that's what she meant, was a home group. She didn't mean where I belong. She meant where we meet is in a home. And I said, well, tell me about that. I wasn't challenging her about it. I really wanted to hear what she was saying. And what she said, whether it was true or not, I've not checked it out, but she said in that town, 75% of the membership belongs to home groups, and that they function much like a bridge club. They don't intend to be really secret, but they migrate from one home to another, just like a bridge club would. And they are attended by invitation. You have to have a year's sobriety to be invited. So I said, well, where do the people who don't have a year go? Now, this girl was no dummy, and she looked like she had never thought about that. She said, geez, I don't know. She said, I guess they go downtown to the club. I said, okay, who works with them? And again, she was stunned. She said, I guess they work with each other. That's not an isolated incident. I have good friends in the program of many years standing who have simply given up the fight. They've given up the fight. And they have opted to, like white flight thing, they've opted to go find a little enclave in the suburbs somewhere and to get away from the mainstream stuff. I can understand it. But it is so far removed from the principles by which we grew and developed that it's pitiful. Where does that go? Where does it go? When we just sort of peel off and get into less and less challenging environments and hide from the problems, where does it end? Where does it lead? Where do we develop the leadership for the next generation? Where do we find people who will take the responsibility to keep our fellowship sound, solid, and with integrity? And I don't think we'll find that in little havens. We'll find it in getting in and taking the stand and holding that flag and moving that sucker. So there are troublesome kinds of things about that. The thing of the in a way there's what we're doing to this weekend. I have mixed feelings about it. I do it a lot, but in all honesty, I have some mixed feelings about just intensively working One reason I wanted to put this in is that it broadens it from just me and my recovery. It broadens it to some bigger issues. And I think that's important. I believe, personally, that I can work the steps and remain almost as self-centered as if I didn't. That if I don't find a way to link in and adapt to the other legacies of unity with the world around me, of being a good neighbor to the folks I work with, of being an agent in this program, of finding a real avenue of service, of having concerns more than my own personal comfort, that I'll miss something awfully important. So, anyway, this is a whole bunch of stuff that relates to this. Right toward the end, I want to come back. I'm not sure exactly where we're working in, but probably somewhere, maybe in that last session of 10, 11, 12, of just sort of discussing a little bit about how we develop soundness. What is the things that we do that develop real soundness and wholeness in this program? What do we do to make sure that we leave it better than we found it? What do we do to make sure it's still an environment where somebody can come in, they got a good shot at recovery? That's our job. And so somewhere in there we'll kind of work back into that. But just wanted to spend these 15 minutes on... Well, now we're using Key West time here now. Tell you what, that anything anybody want to ask or comment about that before we take a break? Yeah, Jim. I'll repeat the question because it's maddening on the tape.
Not really a question. It's, one of the things you mentioned about places where there still isn't a lot of that. We're fortunate down where we are that there's a fellow that spends 6 months a year here who had escaped from Czechoslovakia when it was a communist country, and now has spent the last 10 years going back and rebuilding. He talks about 100 people being the number of people that are sober in Czechoslovakia, having to drive 50 miles to go to a meeting, having to count on the kindness of a priest to be able to get a place where they can have a telephone.
Yeah.
Have it come in. And then we lose sight of those things. I love when you go through the meetings and stuff. We have it so easily here that we lose sight of how difficult it can be and what a vision for you really meant.
Yeah.
I always try to think when we read that as a group of when it was written as opposed to what it means today. It always amazes me.
Yeah. Thanks, Jim. Hey, I might run over to Czechoslovakia and check that out. Let's take 15 minutes and then we'll get going on the step. I appreciate y'all visiting with me and knows that anytime you get an old timer around, he's always going to talk about the thrilling days of yesteryear. You just have to do that, reminisce a little. And the other thing is, I think it's an awfully important context when you think about, like a lot of our literature describes things that are not characteristic of what we're doing now, and so there's kind of a mismatch. And so this kind of gives a little context for where we are in terms of where we're doing our personal work and our work in the program. Jerry's just rigged up some mobility here now, and so we don't have to stand there like I'm tied. I swear that's a relief. Also, I've got a walking mic, and so if any time that you want to comment, whatever, by all means, I would be real pleased to do it. But it's going to be up to you to do it now because I won't be dragging it out. We shift over into steps. And like I said, I'm going to sort of build this thing around my own personal thing, and then probably extrapolate a little bit, of course, But I'll try not to do any preaching or teaching.
if you leave here any smarter than you came in, it won't be my fault. You'll be doing some reading between meetings or something. I described that in my own story about just kind of the events that led up to getting into the program and just getting a start and starting to experience some stuff. And I'd like to just kind of pick up and push that forward a little bit with things that some of us were chatting some in our breaks. Yeah, I'm not the only guy who came into AA and felt like he just fell out of a spaceship or something. That's not an unusual experience. And finding things that help to support and encourage getting into recovery is no small task. Getting hold of things. You never know what's going to work. I was talking with somebody about identifying with speakers. The first speaker that I ever identified with in my entire recovery was a fella. I was almost 2 years in the program, and somebody brought a fellow with them over to the institution just to take in the meeting. I think they lied to him about where they were going. I don't believe he knew that they were going to a maximum custody penitentiary, or he wouldn't have gone. They told him he was going on a picnic or something. And first thing you know, he's in the hoosgow up to his... And the scaredest man I think I've ever seen. They pushed him into speaking a little bit. And the guy was literally so scared that he spoke in a falsetto. He sounded like Tiny Tim. He just kind of squeaked away just for a very few minutes. And that's the first guy I ever identified with. Yeah. As totally unlike me as the guy who spoke at my first meeting. He was the other extreme. I mean, he talked about a hothouse flyer. I don't think he'd ever even driven by a jail before. And so, here I identified with a guy. He was too scared to make anything up. I mean, he just opened up and gave a peek at his life. And that's the first guy I ever connected with. And really felt like, I'm like that. And so, in that interim, there was a whole bunch of stuff that was going on that was keeping me going. When I look back to what started to shape stuff for me, there were some things that stood out as being phenomenally important. One reason that I'm a strong group person and very not only loyal to a group, but a believer in the effectiveness of groups, the vital nature of groups, is that was critical in my getting started in program. The group that I went into at that penitentiary was as fine a group as I've ever been in my life. I was talking with one of our buddies here tonight who said that he'd gone into AA in an institution that didn't click. It just didn't connect. Well, there was nothing about an institution that was a positive factor in anything that happened in my life, if you know what I mean. That institutions basically destroy more than they build. I mean, it's just the nature of the beast. And anything that's happened to me that had real value was in spite of, not because of. And so that kind of condition, in my case, really reinforced how important that group was because it stood in complete contrast to what that institution was like. Now, I certainly didn't understand that when I was first going in there. But somehow, I guess I just sort of felt that I was in the right place. And that was an excellent, and what I mean by an excellent group is it was a group that understood what the primary purpose is. It understood the primary. Not only understood it, but actively carried it out. They had a bunch of guys, that's a strange name, but some of the leaders in the group, they had a job they called 12th steppers. 12th steppers. And they were basically the folk who worked with just hustling things together and doing stuff and working with newcomers. And they had a newcomer program that for 12 weeks you went through the steps. And there were guys in the joint exactly like me. The same situation, same kind of support, same stuff. Only difference was they had found something. And they were just like we do. They were trying to share it with somebody else. That was a major kind of of contributing force in my life. Because what it did, I didn't leave there with any real understanding of the steps or any in-depth kind of stuff. But what I left there was at least an acquaintance of the foundation for recovery. That there really was a program here. That was where I first heard and started to understand what a design for living is about. That Alcoholics Anonymous is not a place where some fortunate few find some mystical kind of answer to their problem. It's not a place where it sort of takes you over and you go into the rapture and all that kind of stuff. That it's a very logical design for living. Now, I didn't fully understand it all, but it was the beginning of understanding that AA is not some kind of a feeling that overtakes us. It's a set of actions that if I take them, the results are almost guaranteed. Almost guaranteed. Now, I've been a manager for 35 years. Not now. I'm unemployed right now. I quit. I got it. And I got one. My whole life, like any manager, you well know, that my whole life was made up of business plans and organizational designs and goals and projections and productions and quotas and all of that stuff. I've looked at more designs for productivity than I ever wanted to see. I have never seen any plan for getting something done more logical than the one laid out to recover from alcoholism in our book. I've never seen anything more logical. It's a design for living. And the good news is that it isn't about how I feel about it. It's about taking the actions and observing that the benefits happen. Recovery happens. It's been a long, long time since I have wasted 1 ounce of energy worried about somebody's motives. I couldn't care less. Now I might over time, but I couldn't care less why somebody comes to Alcoholics Anonymous. None of my business, really. Everybody's got some demon that drove them here, whatever it was, and that's their business. And my job is to pick up on it and then take it from there. I found that motives don't make a heck of a lot of difference. I would have hated for somebody to have received me based on the purity of my motives. I didn't even know why I was there. And so the whole deal with me was that it was just put into position, and fortunately was put into contact with folks who helped me understand that there is a real clear design for living here that will work if I'll give that dude half a chance. And I started to believe that. Now, the belief formed over the years. The other thing was the group that I was in was extremely important to me in that it was a place where, strangely enough, in a group of 300 convicts in a maximum custody penitentiary was the first place I ever learned to trust people in my life. Now, I wasn't ready to invest in financially in some of the guys' schemes, but it was the first place that I ever learned to trust people who were operating in the recovery group in that institution, because they were the first people I ever saw who did exactly what they said they would do. I was used to that. I didn't believe anything when I came here. I didn't believe words. Words were just noise to me. I didn't believe anything. I didn't think anybody did anything for anybody for nothing. I thought everybody had an angle. And the first place that I ever saw guys that actually kept commitments and did what they said with no possible hope of gain was in that setting. And what a tremendous thing that was to sort of give a guy something to hang on to. Now, I will always be grateful for that. When I came in, it's like I said, I really did not believe I was alcoholic. I was convinced that not only because of youth, that I just didn't believe I was alcoholic. The word illness was bothersome to me. I didn't latch onto that. I couldn't connect it. What are you talking about illness? I thought you were talking about smallpox or something. Being drunk didn't seem like an illness to me. It was just sort of a regular practice. I did not connect illness to that whatsoever. And it was a kind of an awkward, embarrassing reference. I didn't feel comfortable with that reference. Didn't argue with it. I didn't argue with anything. I'm just a body sitting there in that group. But it didn't connect to it. I said I was alcoholic, but I was lying like a dog. I wasn't lying, I was complying. Yeah. There were 300 people in there said they were alcoholic. I'm not going to speak up and say, well, I'm something else, I've been set of dumb. I said, yeah, me too. But it didn't mean a thing. It was just a word. And now that age was a barrier for sure. Being so much younger than the other people. My drinking had only lasted 8 years. Serious drinking. It was a strange thing to me, but I caught on after several years in AA that I thought it lasted 12 years. And then when I got sober and realized that I really had enough misery to be here, I had never intended to exaggerate how long I drank. But it was just a way of fitting better. And so I just sort of incorporated every time I passed a liquor store, I guess. If I just finished off a bottle of beer, somebody left at the house. But it was important. For that age was an important kind of a thing because it sort of made me feel an inability to kind of get there. I didn't identify with people. Very important to me was the literature. The literature was extremely important in helping me to understand alcoholism, the illness, and not Jim's story. Because I always came up short when I compared experience with other people. And so the literature, in dealing with it in a broader, more objective kind of way, made a point, and it was a real contribution to me. It was not something that sounded like it excluded me. It sounded like it included me. So that was kind of helpful. And I tell you the thing that started to break down for me. I was a long ways from really taking a first step other than just that kind of little chippy language up there that didn't mean much. A guy spoke one day, and I've never forgotten this thing because it had some meaning for me. You hear all kinds of complicated definitions of alcoholism and explanations and all that. This guy talked about his alcoholism, and he said, I like to think about alcoholism in terms of how it affects my life. And he used 5 examples. He was doing just like that. He said, I think about 5 major areas of my life. And he named I'm sure this is 100% right, but this is right close to it, like home life, his marriage, his job, his finances, his trouble with the law, reputation. You make your own dance list, but that was basically what he said. And he said, if my drinking is causing a problem in any one of those areas on a repeating basis, I don't need to look any further. Anybody's apt to go to a party one night and put a lampshade on their head. Anybody could do that. But when you start becoming the butt of the joke at every party, or the guy who quits getting invited back, don't need to do much more hunting. And so when it's a DWI, my God, anybody could get a DWI. When you get 2 of those suckers, you better start taking a look. When it starts to have a repeating kind of disrupting influence in my life, impacting that. Well, that really, I didn't leave there saying hallelujah, but I never forgot that. Because it cut through all of the mystique of alcoholism, and it made it functional. It made it look at action and result. Action and result. And so when I looked at the areas of my life, there was no area of my life that wasn't devastating. And so, it's taken a real idiot to not read the evidence. And so based on that, I kind of acknowledged that I was alcoholic. Now, I think there's some depth about this whole business of admission. I'm going to visit it 2 or 3 times, but that was starters. That was starters. And I kind of acknowledged that, good God, yeah, man. But it was more academic, more of an acknowledgement of saying, read the facts and draw the conclusion. And it was like a guilty plea, say, yeah, I did that. Didn't have anything to do with understanding powerlessness or anything like that. Just had to do with, man, I'm in trouble and drinking is in my neighborhood big time. So I could put that together kind of logically. And that was a start. I started to recognize, strangely hard to deal with, that I truly had the pattern at a point in my drinking where if I started to drink, I could not predict the outcome. Could not predict what I'd do. The kind of guy, I started to see it, and it was hard to face up to because booze was my friend. And it was tough for me to call it to question it. But I looked at that pattern of behavior just over time, listening to people and reading and thinking about that thing, where it was the same result. Yeah, I was the kind of guy who wanted to stop by a place, have a couple of drinks with the guys, wind up almost invariably closing the joint. That was not once or a dozen times or 100 times. That was every time. Where I would start, and I never recognized that what was going on was that strange process that would say, one more. And they wind up closing the joint in a bootleg joint, often in jail. Sleeping in I had incredible sleeping habits. I had the worst. The only time I ever had a fortuitous kind of mishap with my sleeping, well, it's sort of fortuitous. I mentioned about booze being a social lubricant. One night I got awfully greasy, and for some reason I was in a booth. I didn't normally do that, but I was in a booth, and apparently as I got lubricated, I kind of slid out of the bench and slid under the table. And I was not aware of that at the time. I was busy sleeping. Well, I came to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and I'd gotten out of there, and I was sleeping in the fetal position on a shuttle board. The thing. I never knew what they did that for. I mean, there 2 drunks down there and slide stuff. I'd done it for hours. Never knew what the game was. Just slide that stuff. But I was in the fetal position on that thing. And when I came to, I had that sort of instant panic. Oh, Jesus. What am I doing here? And then it was like the light bulb went off. Oh, God knows. All of my life, I'd had a fantasy about starting at one end of a bar and drinking all the way to the other end. You wonder what drunks think about when they sit there looking at that mirror. That's what I was thinking. I want to try every one of these dudes down here. Now, I don't know how far I got, but that's where they found me, and never had that happen again. But anyway, I was that kind of guy. I didn't plan that, and I didn't plan any of those just kind of crazy outcomes. But I could see that. I could see that just by looking at it, that there was a pattern of destructive stuff, and I knew that when I drank, I got into a lot of trouble. Didn't believe it was alcoholism. I honestly thought with me it was a moral issue. I always had thought it was a moral issue, and even after I got in AA, I thought I could have done better if I had wanted to. It's really what I believe. And the other thing about that started to make a little bit of sense to me, the telling thing about alcoholism to me is not what happens when I take a drink. It's what happens when I don't. It's what happens when I don't. I think our man Silkworth really described it well. Not only in talking about that restlessness and irritability and discontent, but that's telling. But that strange state of mind that precedes a drink. Strange state of mind. Subtle but absolutely overwhelming. You know, typically I was the kind of guy when I would stop drinking, and I'd do that once in a while, I would always feel good, you know, pretty quickly. You heal pretty fast. And so I'd start feeling pretty decent. The only time I've ever been arrested, well, almost arrested, sober, I was on one of my getting sober times, and I was going to get physically fit. You know, that just went with not drinking. So early shift, and at 4 o'clock in the morning, I'm out in an athletic field in my Olympic suit doing my jumping around stuff. Well, they knew me, you know, and so the cruiser went by, and they said, "There's that fool out there doing it again." So they came over to lock me up. I said, "Wait a minute, man. I'm a health man. I'm not a drunk. I like to never talk about it because that was out of character for me." But I would feel good, you know. I mean, health comes back pretty fast, start feeling decent, morale starts to build a little bit. And then a strange thing happens. Not once, not a dozen times, over and over and over again. Two things would always sort of be my Achilles heel. That I would start thinking I would drink like a gentleman and buy some wine, usually about a gallon. Strange logic to that, yeah, but it saves travel, I guess, you know. Or else I really knew the bottom line and just didn't deal with it. But I'd get a gallon of that stuff. I'd sit there and couldn't get my mind off the sucker. You know, I'm sitting in the chair, I have a little glass, and then I say, "Well, I better go see if it's turned over or something," you know. And I go check. And you know the rest of the story. I mean, that's over and over and over again, many times. Or I would be sitting, the other one that was unfailing, I would be at home, whatever that was, and would have that sort of restless feeling. You know, that sort of fidgety feeling. There's nothing wrong. But you're looking out the window, you're picking up the phone, see if it's working. Yeah, walking, can't sit, can't stand up. I'm just kind of beside myself. And nothing wrong. That peculiar state of mind. And I'd say to myself, well, I'm going to just go up to the place. Now, I was always a particular, I'm a home group guy. I was a home bar guy. You know, I always had one where they'd look after me, you know, because I knew I was going to be a mess. And so I'd go back to my haunt. Now, not to drink, of course. There ain't no way. Order a Coke. Don't like Coke. I'd order it anyway, and usually order a second one. Now, all the guys come by, "Hey, man, what are you drinking?" "Nothing. I quit." "What?" "You quit?" "Yeah, quit." And that would last a little while, and then I'd let some hero buy me a drink. Over and over and over again. I never recognized that. I never recognized any of those clues that I was in trouble. I knew I drank too much. I knew I drank at the wrong time. I knew I got drunk when every indication said don't. So I started to form a little bit of a picture. I tell you the one other side of that, and I won't live at it too much because we'll get into it a little bit more later on. Unmanageable life is what I'm talking about. But that unmanageable life encompassed a great deal more than just my little romantic liaison with booze. I had an unmanageable life in many regards. I was a guy who felt that I had to be connected to somebody. Even in my worst moments, I was somebody who felt an absolute need to be joined with somebody else. And it was an overwhelming kind of a need that I felt incomplete if I didn't. I was a guy who felt like I had to have stuff. And so I would have problems with trying to keep my stuff together, trying to have things, trying to hunt things, needing stuff far beyond anything that was a reasonable kind of thing for me. a lot of trouble with money. You know, an amazing thing that's, we'll probably talk about this a little more, but I learned to my surprise that money problems don't have a whole lot to do with money. They have to do with unmanageability. They have to do with that thing of not being willing to live within the limits of my life, you know. And the amazing thing, it's partly a product of the program, but it's also partly a product of reaching the point I reached in life where I lived with nothing for a long time. I lived with nothing. And then getting sober in an environment where nothing was the order of the day. They were strange blessings, but they were blessings because they helped me to get through that kind of phobic notion of what I had to have to define myself. And it helped me learn that I don't have to have anybody and I don't have to have anything. Great freedom. Result is that once I got into this program and it started to work for me, I have never had a financial problem since. I've been broke. And I felt the wool snapping like that dinner that I was in over my head in. But I've never had a financial problem. I've never had it eat my lunch that I've got to get something. I've got to make something. I've got a deadline coming in and all this stuff. Help me. Tremendous thing to realize that when I don't have to have somebody, it's amazing how much easier it is to have somebody. Amazing to me how neurotic need is repelling to people, not attractive. So, anyway, that whole business of unmanageability is more than just booze. It's what I do when I don't drink. It's how my life works when I don't drink. And it's that recognition that I've got an illness, two things. That silkworth, I don't understand what silkworth's talking about, I just believe it. That there is something physiological about me that I don't understand nor try to, called the phenomenon of craving. That if I take a drink, no matter the circumstances, I'm dead meat. Something happens to me that doesn't happen to 90% of the people who drink. I don't know why. I just happen to know that I'm one of them. I'm a guy, now I've studied some about alcoholism. I know more about it than I ever wanted to know. But I'll tell you what the most important thing that I know about it, and that's that I have it. I have it. I don't need it any more complicated than that in terms of my recovery. I understand that I'm a guy who is powerless over alcohol. I'm screwed if I drink, and I'm screwed if I don't. If I don't do something to help my mind stay at rest, to help this unmanageable life become functional again. I'll come back and just visit this first step a little bit more, but that was just sort of the way it started with me. Of sort of an incremental recognition that I was in a lot of trouble with it, logically and in every way, intellectually, I could understand it. I was in a lot of trouble. But we'll come back because you have to sink the hook a little more, I think, for long-term sobriety, I believe. And I'm always amazed at. And by the way, now anytime anybody wants to comment, question, whatever, just give me a signal, and I'll try to slow down. I'm always amazed and deeply appreciative of how we approach a guy like me. Well, all of us really, but you know, how our program approaches this place. Because what I've done up to this point is just simply an